When George Washington took over Mount Vernon at age 22, there were 18 slaves. When he married, he gained control of 200 more, which technically belonged to the estate of his wife's first husband. By 1786, he owned 216 slaves. Thomas Jefferson inherited many slaves. His wife brought a dowry of more than 100 slaves, and he purchased many more throughout his life. At some points, he was one of the largest slave owners in Virginia. In 1798, Thomas Jefferson owned 141 slaves, many of them elderly. One of Thomas Jefferson's slaves was Sally Hemings, allegedly the half-sister of his deceased wife. During T.J.'s presidency, a rumor appeared in print that she was his mistress. Thomas Jefferson denied this story, which was also passed on as Hemings' family tradition. The youngest of Hemings' 6 children, and the only one whose paternity can be traced through DNA, definitely descended from the Jefferson line, either through T.J., his brother Randolph, or one of Randolph's sons. James Madison grew up in a slave-owning family and owned slaves all his life. He did not free his slaves in his will. James Monroe inherited a slave named Ralph. When he owned the farm Highland, he owned 30 to 40 slaves. Andrew Jackson bought his first slave, a young woman, in 1788. By 1794, his business included slave trading, and he had purchased at least 16 slaves. In the 1820s, Jackson owned about 160 slaves. He did not free his slaves in his will. John Tyler owned slaves and was quoted saying, "God works most inscrutably to the understanding of men. The Negro is torn from Africa, a barbarian, ignorant, and idolatrous. He is restored, civilized, enlightened, and a Christian." In 1847, Zachary Taylor owned more than 100 slaves, and he supposedly never sold a slave. Other presidents that owned slaves include Martin Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, James K. Polk, Andrew Johnson, and Ulysses S. Grant. Why did the trade begin? Expanding European empires in the New World lacked one major resource: a workforce. In most cases, the indigenous peoples had proved unreliable. Most of them were dying from diseases brought over from Europe, and Europeans were unsuited to the climate and suffered under tropical diseases. Africans, on the other hand, were excellent workers. They often had experience of agriculture and keeping cattle. They were used to a tropical climate, resistant to tropical diseases, and they could be worked very hard on plantations or in mines.
No, I've often said that thank God for slavery because, had not, then the blacks who are here would have been stuck in Africa. And you see how bad Africa is. Everybody and mama trying to get out of Africa and come to America. And so God has a way of looking out for folks, and he made it possible by way of slavery to get black folks into this country.
Christianity has been misused for hundreds of years to keep your people in subjugation. And I'm speaking now a reality that the history books do not record, but history does. Christianity was used because if I said, okay, you don't believe the way I believe, and Christianity is the best way to believe, so I'm going to take you, and it's going to be for your own good, husband. It's going to be for your own good. I'm going to take you, and I'm going to tear away everything about you, and just keep your hands and your feet, because they can help me getting off. But I'm going to do this for your own good, because I'm going to give you a God. Now, what does that God look like? The reality of it is when he came here, he didn't look like me. So what am I going to do about that? I'm going to make him look like me. So for hundreds of years, we've been telling you, and now you have to keep in mind that we took away any other god that you might have through force, through fear, through pain, through any means necessary. So now I'm going to give you a God, but I'm going to do that in a way that is going to further me. So I'm going to give you a God that looks like me, so that when you bow down to that God, you're bowing down to me. Because the reality is, and see, this is something that bothered me when I left the church out of frustration, because I wasn't hearing these things. Because the Bible tells us what Jesus looked like when he walked here. The Bible tells us what he's going to look like when he comes back. We have taken that and changed it. We've given your people a God that looks like me, so that you don't have any qualm about bowing down to me. See, because this is the image of God. I don't know of any sin that we've committed that's greater than that one. And we did it with the Bible in our hands when we were beating your ancestors for looking at us eye to eye. And we're quoting to them from this scripture. Even if we allowed them to have their own ministers, which there wasn't many of because we didn't allow them to read. But if we said, okay, you can have your church. This is my plantation. I'm going to do what I want with it. You can have your church. But then spies were sent. And those spies would stand outside the church, and that man would be beaten, perhaps killed, if he preached anything other than 3 sermons. And those 3 sermons were turn the other cheek, obey your master, and it's going to get better one of these days. God's going to take care of all of it. You're going to be in a happy, happy land. So put up with what you're putting up with now. And we made your people preach that to your people, and it's still being done. It's still being done. Those are the sermons that your people hear. Those sermons are what causes your people to comfort me when I do something that's wrong.
You are listening to John Henry Media Network in the United States of America. It is the right place for you, your family and friends, to hear very powerful messages for Black America. You can contact us at jahu.enterprises@yahoo.com. I say again, jahu.enterprises@yahoo.com, and get your music, message or information heard by millions, for a small donation, today.